I'm Andy.
I'm Kieran.
And I'm Joe.
And today we want to know, what if Siri didn't suck? Or more broadly, how is this next wave of AI assistants going to change the game for us and our lives? What's up, folks? Welcome back to another episode of AI FYI, your friendly neighborhood podcast where we demystify AI and how it's changing our lives in so many different ways in so many different industries. And today we have a very relevant topic for probably most people on this podcast: AI virtual assistants, and how are they going to impact our lives? We'll talk a little bit about the history of virtual assistants. We'll get into some of the different use cases between personal and professional lives. And we'll dive into a little bit of the technology underlying these virtual assistants and how that technology has actually gone through quite a large shift in the last couple of years and is making for some maybe very interesting AI assistants in the future.
And as always, if this is your first time listening to us, we're going to cover the good, the bad, and the buggy. We are three people with expertise working in AI, and we're going to tell you guys how we see the industry and this segment of AI interacting with you now and in the future.
And I know we're probably going to be naming some examples of things that are out there that you can use or things to be on the lookout. So if you're here to find a personal assistant, we might be able to help you there as well.
So I wanted to start off with just a tiny little history of personal assistants. So really, where did these virtual assistants come from? And where we kind of start is, probably thousands of years ago, when you had very rich people that had their own, servants, people working for them, that kind of did everything for them in their day-to-day lives. They might cook for them. They might be, sharing content or providing messages to the public. They might be coordinating or scheduling things for them. So in a way, these assistants were carrying out pretty much all of the mundane tasks for people like kings, people like, very rich land rulers, etc. And so again, this technology, if you will, goes back thousands of years when humans were basically taking on the work of other individuals to help them make their lives easier. So fast forwarding, through those thousands of years, there's a lot of history where humans were those assistants for other people. But then we get into the technology era. The first example of a virtual assistant powered by technology actually started back in 1964. At MIT, they developed a computer called Eliza, and it wasn't particularly useful. It wasn't particularly smart. But essentially what they had created is an assistant, quote unquote assistant, where you could converse with this bot, with this robot, if you will, and it will try and provide responses to your statements. And what it was trained for was particularly psychological evaluations. And what they wanted to do was essentially create a computer that could kind of do some psychological assessments or, take over the role of a therapist in some sense. So needless to say, they didn't actually replace any therapists.
They kind of did. It just took 70 years, right? Like, we have all probably used ChatGPT as a therapist before. But that was the first thing they tried to build, was like, let's just go for mental health care. Boom, one of the hardest, most sensitive, most delicate topics. Let's just go right there. Why didn't they start with anything easier?
Yeah, I mean, so basically, in the research, what they were looking for is primarily trying to build this technology. And for them, that was, I guess, the first use case that they thought of, hey, let's actually have this computer conduct these, evaluations. And again, I think the main goal for them was to really help like focus down on a narrow vertical, because in the 60s there definitely wasn't generalized AI technology to be able to do a lot of different tasks. And so just a little bit about the way that Eliza worked. It was very much a keyword based algorithm. So they would look for certain keywords. So given this was like a counseling technology, they might be looking for things like I'm depressed or I need help with. And so they had these keywords, these little phrases that they had programmed into the system, and then based on the keywords that the person had to input, they can construct different responses. They also had a quote unquote intelligent mechanism of breaking down a phrase. So essentially they were pulling out tokens, which might be like single words or bigrams. And then they'll look at, are any of those tokens matching keywords in the list that they're looking for? And then they'll also try and reconstruct the response based on different parts of the sentence.
So let me cut in there because Kieran's using his tech expertise words token and bigrams. And let me explain that. Imagine you are talking to Bank of America circa 2013, and you will type into the little chat window, I'd like to talk to a person, please. And then the thing goes, I do not know what you mean. It's because somebody programmed it to look for the word human, and it didn't know that a person and a human, like those are different words that kind of mean the same thing in context. These keyword looking things, they're looking for exact matches. And when Kieran talks about tokens or bigrams, those are basically different ways to subdivide a sentence. So like sentences have words and punctuations. You can also cut them up in different ways, often known as tokens in natural language processing. So somebody had to like think of everything you might want to ask and make like a script for the bot that's like the person says, give me a receipt, tell them to get it themselves, like the usual customer service nonsense.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's largely how these early assistants and chatbots were built, was very much a scripting exercise by the developers. So they have to imagine what are all the different paths that this person might bring up, and we have to be able to support that. And in cases where the user asks something that they haven't programmed, generally they'll have some default response like, can you please say that in another way? Or I'm sorry, I don't understand what you said, right? So, and the cool part was it was a little more sophisticated than every single sentence or possible response has been typed out, but it's actually deconstructing the input. This is in the case of Eliza. It was actually deconstructing the input phrase. And then based on the keywords in there and the other parts of the sentence, it can provide a response. So, for example, if someone says, I'm depressed because of my job, the system would understand like, okay, depressed is a keyword that I'm looking for, and it's breaking out my job is the cause of that depression. But just based on simple English grammar rules. And then it can construct a response. And so it might say, can you tell me more about your job? So now it's kind of contextualized your question into a response that may make it seem like it actually understands what you're talking about. But again, needless to say that this was not an intelligent system. It was very rudimentary and largely based on, keywords and specific things that the developers had programmed into it.
And I think this gets into why like so many applications that have tried to do personal assistants or executive assistants, why they've sucked, in the past history, because it's very difficult. It takes a tedious amount of planning to figure out exactly what, the chatbot, how it's going to perform and like how well it can perform and how narrow it's going to be. And that doesn't even get into the amount of like hardware resources needed for some of these things, or like the machine learning team, and in some cases even the massive amount of data to tackle like such a narrow problem.
The funny thing to me is how fragile these things are, where it's impossible until ChatGPT to make them really work. Kieran gave the example of the sentence, I'm depressed because of my job. And you can imagine somebody knowing to program in whenever it says because of, look for the next like 2 or 3 words and look those up in this database of reasons why somebody might be depressed. However, let's say you come in and type in, I'm depressed because of my job, CUZ. All of a sudden, if nobody had thought to put cuz as a keyword shortening of because of, like it just immediately melts down. And there is
Mhm.
millions of things like that in our language. And that's what's cool about ChatGPT is you don't even have to spell correctly. You can be as ESL as you want to. You just throw close enough words at it and it gets it.
Yeah, and we're going to get into basically what's now changing. And we're going to definitely talk more about ChatGPT.
Yeah. Yeah. The technology has changed significantly from those early versions. And so just kind of moving through a little bit more of the history. So we were kind of in this, largely keyword, heavily, hard coded, predefined scripting type assistants for decades. Actually, only in the last couple of years has that significantly shifted. And you will actually see there's still examples of that today. But so, after the 60s, the next, I would say, major step forward in the AI assistance game is something that we're probably all very familiar with and maybe have some fond memories of, Clippy. If you haven't heard of Clippy, officially named Clipit, this was the assistant in Microsoft Office circa 1996 until about 2012, or maybe 2008. I think they decommissioned it. But Clippy was a little paperclip that would show up in your word processor and often ask you erroneous questions about what you were working on. And so Microsoft had built this technology, again, largely keyword based, largely scripted and pre-programmed. And so the goal of Clippy was to essentially help you in your word processing journey. So if you're writing a letter, it might show up and it's like a 50-50 guess whether it's right. It might say, hey, I noticed that you're writing a letter. Can I help you with that? Or it might be like, hey, are you working on an essay? And you're like, no, I'm not working on an essay. So
And it's like, great, here is your template for a resume. Like it just would go wild.
yeah, exactly. It just like
Yeah.
did not get anything. And the thing I read about it, and I totally feel it is one of the most widely and universally hated assistants in history.
Yeah, I think, one of the reasons Clippy failed is probably because it was trying to do too much. And like we said earlier, even to do one narrow thing, it's very difficult. So to create something that tries to do it all was, sort of dead on arrival, probably. But I also want to say, like thinking about Clippy, it sort of proves that there was an appetite or a vision for having a personal assistant that could do it all so early. I think this is something that like the technology industry has always wanted and strived for. And like a company at the time that had a massive amount of resources to attempt it, like couldn't even get it right. So I think, I don't know, the industry as a whole has probably just been like waiting until we could get this right.
And we have more evidence that we've been wanting this for a while. I just looked this up. But do you guys remember the movie Smart House? It came out in
Yes.
Yeah.
1999. 1999, so it was the
Oh
heyday
wow,
of
that was
Clippy.
99.
So for those of you who are not millennials, Smart House was a Disney Channel movie. I just found out it was
So
directed
good.
by LeVar Burton. And in the movie, this family, single dad and two or three kids, win a contest to move into a house that is like an AI assistant. So you can go into the house and talk to it, and it does, well, like we'll get into the sexist tropes of this, but does like housework, right? Like it cooks, it cleans, etc. And there was this wild imagination where like it turns a whole wall into a movie theater for the kids at one point. That it's really incredible. And that movie came out in 1999. So yeah, I think and even in Star Trek, they had the AI generated doctors, the holographic doctors, like 97, 98. So by the late 90s, in our consciousness, we were thinking about what can these robots do for us.
I also want to say at this point, like we're really bouncing across different industries here. I do think the idea of a personal assistant is a little nebulous. It could be any chatbot, it could be a therapist, it could be a doctor, it could be a smart house. So I guess if we had to define what we're talking about here broadly, it's like any sort of AI driven thing that can make your life easier. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's kind of where like the assistant comes from, right? And like that's the primary focus is it's really this is supposed to help you in like day-to-day activities. And so while, something like computer vision or audio processing, things like that are going to be very helpful in like large volume tasks of going through, 10,000 images and identifying a particular human or theft, burglary on the street. This is very different where the goal isn't to do thousands and thousands of things all at once, but rather help you with very specific tasks. Like I need to schedule a doctor's appointment.
That's from the user perspective. The goal is to help you in your life, but we must think about the goal of the business that's creating these things is, as always, to keep you using their product to make money, probably to sell you something. Expect that to interfere in your personal assistant use cases in the future.
So Clippy, that was first released in 1996. Again, it was decommissioned about 10 years later after it was universally hated, and many memes, blog posts, culture kind of came out of this one little mascot that Microsoft created.
I've heard rumors that Clippy 2 might be coming, and I can imagine it'll be far more capable.
Yeah, if you actually go around like Reddit and things, there's like all these channels of people talking about like Clippy resurgence. They even have like Clippy emulators online that you can get to just like have the original Clippy do nothing for you. Yeah, it's pretty funny.
I'd like to make Clippy for Halloween. I think that'd be really fun.
Smart.
Yeah.
I like it.
So after Clippy's heyday, the next real step forward that we got was actually in 2011 when Apple first released Siri. And for those of you that don't know, Apple Siri was their first assistant that they brought into the iPhone. So it was first released on the iPhone, and it was all speech to text. So you couldn't actually type and talk to Siri, but it was simply voice activated. So you would say something like, "Hey Siri, make a phone call," or "Hey Siri, search for this thing online." So again, it was an assistant that's supposed to help you with specific tasks to just make your life a little bit easier. Again, the first versions of Siri, not very helpful, often got the speech to text part wrong, so then it didn't end up actually accomplishing the task that you're trying to do. And the tasks that it could do were very limited, like play a specific song, search something online, make a phone call, interact with my contact book, send a text message, things like that.
I have so many stories of just hilarious Siri fails in my household. And to be honest, they haven't slowed down that much, but I remember one evening. So, for context, I'm an immigrant. A lot of my family and friends are immigrants. Imagine a dinner party where the members are like accented people from Slavic countries, the Philippines, Vietnam, and they're toddlers. And they're trying to get Siri to play a song. Oh my God, it was so funny.
Yeah, and that was actually another interesting piece about Apple Siri is one, By 2011, Apple was definitely a global company organization. They had, billions of, I don't know if they had billions, maybe they were at a billion users, but definitely, millions and hundreds of millions of users worldwide with in different countries, different languages. And again, this was all voice activated, which made the challenge for Apple to successfully deliver this pretty immense. And they had to be able to support those languages a little bit behind the technology. So they were, again, using machine learning to support this technology, which meant that they had to get tons and tons of data to train Siri to be able to respond to these different actions. And my friend actually worked on training Siri. And what he did was every day he just transcribed messages that people had said to Siri. And so in the Siri interface, you can talk to and if it gets that wrong, you can say this wasn't correct, and it'll essentially send a message to Apple, to the developers, and then it will show up as like incorrectly translated phrases or transcribed phrases. And then there's literally hundreds and probably thousands of people around the world that are just transcribing what people told Siri to make sure it's correct.
Fun fact, you have been one of those people and you don't even know it. So, pretty much, if you're a person listening to this podcast, you've got a smartphone, you're going to have either an Android or an Apple, and you've used voice to text at least once. And unless you've gone in and switched the special settings, if you do something on voice to text and then you realize it made a mistake on the transcription, that turning your voice into the written down text, and you go in and fix it, they will store that information and it gets added, that snippet of your voice and the correct transcription, to their database to train the next generation of the model. And so that's sometimes these companies are hiring people like Kieran's friend or like us when we worked at a data labeling company to outsource doing this stuff. Other times they trick you into making their training data for them.
Yeah, exactly. And so, this is where we're seeing, pretty wide use of what we would consider actual more AI. And so essentially what they were doing is, using a combination of these keyword based mechanisms. So if I'm saying, hey, make a phone call, it knows that like that phrase is, I need to like dial a number and call it out, right? So they have a combination of keyword phrases that are going to allow the assistant to identify what's the task that I'm trying to accomplish, mixed with things like fuzzy matching, where now if I'm spelling things wrong or mispronouncing things, it's still able to get the intent that I'm trying to make, and then proceed with that action. Again, while Siri was revolutionary, quote unquote, in its early phases, it still was not that great. And if you did ever interact with Siri in the early, 2010s, you probably had a lot of frustration.
Or maybe you got lucky and instead of getting angry at Siri, you got angry at Google or you got angry at Alexa. I mean, you'll pick your poison. They all sucked.
Yeah, and to that point, so 2011, Apple released Siri, and soon after, in the years between 2011 to 2014, is when Google released their Google Assistant, Amazon Alexa, Microsoft Cortana. So these are now the big players getting into this game, and really putting forward a technology that is now actually impactful. So if we look back at Eliza, couldn't do anything, wasn't helping people actually accomplish tasks, but very much a engineering exercise. We go to Clippy, where there is now an actual intent to help people, and it might have actually helped some people here and there when formatting your letterheads or giving you templates for things, but still very limited in its use case. And now early 2010s, we're getting into more of these like generalized assistants where it's actually able to accomplish many different tasks that you might be looking for, but still the quality of that performance wasn't really up to the point where I can rely on Siri to do a lot of things for me. But there might be specific things like sending text messages, looking up things online, etc. And then that kind of brings us to where we are today. And really the latest leap forward. And I would say this is significantly more than any of the past leaps forward, has been with the release of LLMs, broad adoption of that, things like ChatGPT, Bard, Google Gemini, etc.
I'm going to try and explain to people why this leap was really big. Just FYI, folks, I did none of the research for this episode. Joe and Kieran did it all. I'm coming in unprepared, but this was a major change, and I want to call this out. Like Kieran said, from starting in like the 1960s, going up until a couple years ago, it was just like a death by 1,000 cuts. All these companies shipping these products that were mid, kind of underwhelming, and they built them just using this elaborate system of like rules and caveats and increasingly more complicated, if this do this, if that do that, big databases of possible actions. In chatbot technology, they're called intents. So like, what is the intent of the user? Can we understand it? Can we react to it? And it was just this one strategy, and they were just grinding it and grinding it and grinding it for apparently 50 years. Then comes along transformers and big large language models, and just like a big train just takes all that and wipes it off the map. If you're still doing that, you messed up. Because the way that large language models work doesn't require any of the fussiness or caveats or human beings having to predict what somebody wants from the assistant. The technology is different because it becomes super generalizable. And that basically means it has some of the human like ability to handle ambiguity and to make a best guess even if it doesn't know what you want. So that's why you feel like there's this huge change in the technologies, because it's a completely different strategy that's being used right now, which is why these things are suddenly not useless.
I can add a few things to that. It took a lot of manpower and money and thought to create even these mid flows and like AI assistants. And only a few companies could really take a stab at it. Like we talked about Microsoft taking a stab at it, Apple taking a stab at it, these big folks who can afford it. Now with this new technology, these big companies that have lots of funding can also make these chatbots like OpenAI and Google Gemini, and allow smaller companies who didn't have the technology, like the money or the technology or the teams to build this stuff, they can tap into these big like LLM offerings and sort of pay a fee to just build a application over top of them, so that they get all the benefits of a large generalized model that already knows how to talk like a human and knows everything about everything. And they can just feed it into their like small business chat interface, saving them a ton of money, meaning they don't have to hire a bunch of machine learning engineers. And then the model itself like just outperforms this traditional ML. And I also want to add that it is becoming increasingly possible to even put a layer of your own data on top of these large language models. This is called like fine tuning or creating a RAG application, retrieval augmented generation. So that let's say you're like a small business flower shop, you can tap into a large language model supplied by OpenAI, like ChatGPT, but ask the model to also fetch your hours of operations or your store location or your scheduling, making it
your inventory of
to have,
flowers
like,
and your proprietary
your inventory
knowledge. Yeah.
So you get the benefit of this generalized model, and it knows things about your specific business. It's pretty incredible. I want to say also on this technology, I heard someone say the other day that like 2022 was the year of discovery or breakthrough with this stuff. And 2023 was the year of experimentation. And of course, they're still experimenting, but 2024 is going to be the year of production and implementation, and when we'll see probably like a lot of this shift happening with many of the products that we're going to be talking about. A lot of them are in transition from like the old ways to the new ways.
Yeah, and I want to do a quick detour because you mentioned RAG. Basically, exactly what it sounds like, right? Retrieval. So, retrieval is I'm getting something, augmented generation. And the way that this works is essentially I have a company, I have a whole bunch of proprietary documents or information that just my company knows. So, say we have a sales tool and there's a bunch of methodologies that we use internally for our sales, and we have documentation around those methodologies, and we have customer contact lists that we need to interact with. And so now, right, we have these generalized models, so something like ChatGPT that isn't aware of all of that information. And so if I want to deploy an assistant or some sort of, conversational AI within my organization that is aware of the information that we have internally, I will actually augment that AI. So augment ChatGPT or whatever LLM that we're using with the information. And so what that means is it could be implemented in many different ways. The most simple way you could think of is if you've ever interacted with ChatGPT and you're talking to it, when you type something, that's called a prompt, right? So you're prompting the LLM and it's going to respond. And so the simplest way is within your prompt, you can actually provide it with all of the context that it needs. So for example, in the case of our business, right, I might prompt.
Okay, I'm going to cut you off, Kieran, because prompt engineering is above everybody's pay grade here. Folks, you ever ask ChatGPT, like, hey, who won the game yesterday? And then it's like, my training data cutoff was September 2022. I don't know. And you're like, oh, can't you just Google it for me? That's exactly what RAG is. Just imagine you ask it something it didn't already know, and it's like, wait a second, and Googles it. Might be Googling out of somewhere else, not actual Google. Gets the information and then answers it for you. That's all it is.
Yeah.
I also want to say,
taking context on real life information and using that to provide you answers.
Yeah. And it sort of points to the fact that the businesses that are probably at the most risk with this shift is those businesses that don't require or have specialized data. So I think a good example is like dictionary.com or Grammarly. They provide a service that ChatGPT and a well-performing LLM can do just fine without like additional information. I worry about those businesses because what do they have to offer in the face of this like all-knowing generalized model?
Sorry for the delay. I'm guessing you guys get into this, but this technology is so powerful. It's already helping so many people. I can tell you about stories in my life of like how much more useful this current generation of assistants is than anything we've ever had before. This is in economic terms called creative destruction, folks. So think about when all the people used to have like horses and horse buggies and horse stables and blah blah blah, and then the car came along and everybody who used to work in horses is like, what would why would you need a horse if you could have a car? We're in that period of economic creative destruction right now in certain types of information work. Make no mistake about it.
I think, in this line of thinking too, it's going to affect the way we consume the internet and consume information. If you have suddenly a competent Siri or any other competent personal assistant, you might not need interfaces at all. And we're going to talk about some startups and companies that are taking on the task of having like an assistant that's really without an interface. Why go to google.com if you can just ask your assistant something and it's going to tell you, it's going to read out to you what you need to know. So I think this has implications for, the internet itself and sort of the window and the medium with which we get information.
Analogy, I guess, is have you guys ever played the game where like you're like a statue and then someone is directing you and like telling you all the instructions? So like lift your arm, put it on the table, grab the knife, dip it in the jelly, put it on, you know, like, so like they're basically instructing you every step of the way, but they could also just say, go make a peanut butter jelly sandwich. Like, this is that shift, right? Where we're going from every single instruction needs to be predefined and very clear to I can just ask it something and it will understand my intent, and it can
Mhm.
go out, do the whole RAG thing to pull the relevant information and then provide me with something that's actually useful. So that's kind of like the phase shift that we're at right now.
There's also a different piece of technology like coming over the horizon that is massively going to supplement LLMs, and it's agents. And that agents aren't anything new, but there's so okay, so an agent is going to be the thing that actually takes an action. So you can ask an LLM to you can try to ask an LLM to schedule something on your calendar. It's not going to be able to do it. It needs to talk to an agent to take that action. Or a robot that is designed to clean your home needs to have agents that can listen for a instruction and then actually execute it. So it's sort of the like manpower that can back an LLM to actually take actions. Um, and that's essential when we think about a PA, because it's nice to just get information, but it needs to go do things like, you know, coordinate with friends or send out a text or schedule something, make a new list. That's like a huge game changer, is that piece too. I also want to mention, like, there are other technologies at work that make personal assistants successful, and we talked about like transcription being one of them. And in the past, like Siri wasn't great at transcribing, speech to text. That is also like rising with all the other model boats and
Mm-hmm.
becoming great. And so that problem's sort of out of the way, is that now we can create devices that can accurately listen and understand what you're trying to say, even if you have an accent or you're a toddler. That stuff's getting better too. So there's a few like technologies at play here that are just getting better, that are going to come together and really rock the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the cool thing is the limitations now are very much going to be based on our own creativity. So, like, what can we think of the assistant doing? Whereas previously, the limitations were very much the technology behind these things. And, in 1996, we just literally didn't have anything that could power an LLM. Like, there was physically not enough hardware on a device to power an LLM. Versus today, we have these very generalized technologies that can do a lot of things. And now the limitation is really in how much we're implementing, and how much autonomy that we're giving these systems to these agents to be able to go out and carry out those actions that we're looking at.
There's one other thing I wanted to mention about this shift. In the past, you needed essentially a machine learning team, folks who really work closely with data to create these types of models. And now that you can just tap into the work that a different machine learning team has done over at OpenAI, it means that if you are a humble software developer or somebody who knows a bit about code, you now have it in your hands to go and build this personal assistant. You don't need a whole team to do it. And that really opens the door for any business who has access to a software engineer to go and create a personal assistant. That's going to be a big part of the boom, I think, is just
And even
accessibility.
that need for a software engineer is going away. There's this huge trend right now in technology called no code software. So the company I work at right now, Verta, has a no code interface for you to make an LLM assistant for yourself. And we have a no code interface for you to make your own RAG system. I did it yesterday on reviews of the three body problem. It took me 4 minutes. Didn't have to code a thing. It's awesome. I do want to call out one big gap here, which is we are software people, so we're like, the world is possible, but we're talking about everything on your computer, on your phone, on the internet. Getting this into the robot that will do whatever you want is still far away. Um, there's a demo from, I think, BMW that was a robot hooked up to OpenAI, and it was like picking up an apple and putting away some dishes at the instruction of a person. The
Mhm. I
challenge
think it was
there is,
Figure.
yeah,
There's a company
the
called Figure.
robotics.
Yeah, the
Figure that does it.
robotics.
Oh, I'm excited to hear about that. But yeah, like we're still not quite at the revolution is here for robots do all of our labor for us. But we're definitely like, if you do a job at a computer, odds are your job could be much easier. You could do just as much work in like half the time or a third the time if you know how to use ChatGPT in some cases.
More
Don't tell your
accurately,
boss,
your job
collect them
is
paychecks.
yeah, yeah. More accurately, your job will go away,
Yeah.
not get
More to
easier.
come on that.
I think we've kind of flipped our script a little bit and we went into the history and the technologies behind some of these personal assistants. Was there anything else on the technology that you wanted to get into, Joe? Um,
Yeah, I wanted just to talk about this is a this is sort of a future thing, but what the technology shift means is that you now have these large models like ChatGPT that can kind of do it all. They might need a little bit of information about your specific business, such as your inventory or your location, all that. But I think it's going to be really interesting to watch for if we all just move to using like a single all-knowing LLM like ChatGPT, or if we are really going to see this proliferation of small businesses that have like a chat or personal assistant option. It's sort of a question of, are we going to consolidate or is there going to be an explosion here? And I think a good example of consolidation is like Amazon, where, yeah, you could go to Circuit City and then go over to Sears and then go over to like the vitamin store and get everything you need at different places. But with Amazon, it had it all in one place and you could do it in your living room. I think that sort of harkens to the threat that we could all just find ourselves interacting with the best performing LLM to get all our information. And that means a lot of businesses go the way of the dodo. Interesting to think about.
I need to hire somebody on Fiverr, a competitor to AI assistants, to make a song of Joe saying, "Yeah, you could just go to Circuit City." Boom, boom, boom. I need a remix of that. Murdered by Words. Wow. Go to Circuit
I was trying to think
City.
of
Are you
places that
serious?
are like, well, radio. I was trying to think of businesses that are gone in the consolidation
defunct.
of, yeah. And like I mentioned Grammarly and like dictionary.com earlier, like, will they be around in 5 years? Because a nice, you know, LLM can do that much easier and cheaper. Excuse me. Yeah.
I want to talk then a little bit about just two things that come to mind, which is alternatives to technology. So, in like 2014 or 15, I had to schedule a lot of meetings for work, and I got hit by an ad for an AI company that writes your email. Like you basically go like, "Oh, I'll introduce you to my assistant Andrew," and you CC them on an email, and you say like, "Andrew, like schedule a meeting with this person. We need 30 minutes next week." And then the AI takes over and does the emailing back and forth and finding the time on the calendar with the person. And I can't remember if this was me deluding myself or actually news, but like I'm pretty sure that was just people pretending to be AI. Just at the speed that it was working at the times that it was working, its response times. I'm pretty sure that was just what we in the tech industry call the AI API, where API stands for actually people in India. More to come on that. Um, the other thought I'm having is like, there's so many times where I just know like somebody else can do this better and faster than me. Been a lot of times I've outsourced a bit of work on platforms like Fiverr, which is kind of like hiring an assistant. Like I've hired people just to do, often at work, like some targeted bit of research or content production for an amount of money that was like not very significant to me. Like I just didn't want to draft those 15 email templates, get somebody else to do it. with these instructions and it comes back, or like some like logo design work and things like that for t-shirts. So now, last time, like early 2022, I needed to design a logo for some corporate swag, and I got a woman on Fiverr to do it. And then earlier this year, I had to do it again, and I just did it myself with ChatGPT, with Dolly. So yeah, creative destruction, we're in it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was something we kind of glossed over in the history of it. But you know how I said, like, thousands of years ago, people were doing this. And people still do this. There are still places where you can go get a virtual assistant job, and you're virtually on a telephone, and people might call in and make requests. A company might employ a service that just has a whole bunch of these people waiting to do a bunch of tasks. So again, like email, text, whatever, scheduling. And yeah, these are still around today, but again, like we're talking about, this might be a archaic tool, and it might just be AI that kind of takes over all of this.
I think it gets into this gets into, this will only be as successful as the mediums it's possible to work within and how seamless it's going to be. Like, we would expect a personal assistant to be able to send emails, make a phone call, go through a website's reservation system, interact with the physical world, like house cleaning or
Organize
whatever.
my closet,
Yeah. And so
please.
Make me
a
dinner.
AI personal assistant is only going to be as successful as how it connects to robots, how it connects to the systems we already use, being able to log in and use your email. It's a interesting perspective.
Yeah. So I want to kind of move forward. We went through history and technologies. Again, where technology has kind of landed today is we're using these very powerful LLMs as the main backend powering these assistants so that they can do very generalized things. We have a whole episode on AI and the singularity where we talk about AGI, and basically when and where and how are we going to get to a fully generalized intelligence. And I think there's a lot of overlap with that when we talk about these assistants, because ultimately what we want, right, is a human, something or someone with human-like capabilities to carry out tasks for us. And to do this very broadly is really going to require us to get towards that AGI, the artificial general intelligence. And that's definitely where the world is going. Go check out that episode. It's very exciting, and lots of speculation in there, but it's cool.
And you said something there. You said what you're gonna want is like a human or a human-like intelligence to do this work for you, and being able to afford human labor has always been a status symbol. So there's a book called Consider the Fork, A History of Culinary Utensils, I read once, and it talked about how for a while meringues and whipped cream and mousse was really trendy in certain societies. It's like the 1800s, because it indicated that you had enough servants that you could take somebody out of the kitchen for an hour to beat egg whites manually with a whisk. So then, because that was a status symbol, that work, we invented like those little hand crank egg beater things. And then everybody was able to serve meringue, and it kind of fell out of fashion, actually. And now everybody, when you move in with your first partner or you get married or whatever, somebody gives you a KitchenAid that's got the whisk attachment. So there's this like status or elite symbol of being able to treat other people's lives as, I'm going to get political here, disposable, their time as less valuable than yours, trade money for their services. And this creative destruction is going to come with a lot of like interesting cultural implications, right? Like your labor might not be worth anything. You might be out of a job. Then again, you might have the exact same level of luxury assistance that today's billionaires do. So like, what's going to happen in the next 50 years? I don't know. Let's find out.
Moving past the technologies, I think I want to get into a little bit of the actual, examples of some of these. And there's really two places that we were looking at. One was in your personal life, and one is in your professional life. So, Joe, do you want to maybe go in and talk a little bit about how we have use assistants in our personal lives?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've touched on this, but there's just so much gray area. I think even with personal and professional life, and like one tool can kind of do something. You can have a tool that does a to-do list. You can use that for work or your personal life. Um, but when I think about like a personal AI assistant, there are things out there for calendar management, automating your routines, reading the news, the weather, getting directions, coordinating with friends, reading out and sending texts, tracking fitness, meal planning, managing your finances, and making and managing lists and other writings and content. Um, a quick Google search for like AI personal assistant shows you so many tools, and it basically harkens to the explosion that's coming of like AI assistants, both very generalized and ones that are for more acute tasks. And again, we're in this transition. So I'm going to rattle off a list of some that I saw, some that seem to be a little bit more popular. And it's a little hard to say kind of where they're at in that transition. Are they still relying on the old technology, or are they fully going head on into the new technology? Okay, so a couple that I saw. Ohai, OHAI, advertises itself as an AI household assistant. So this is like managing family calendars, things to do around the house, scheduling. Nada is a transcription service. There's a whole lot of transcription services out there, and they're, again, it's sort of a niche piece of personal assistance is transcription. It's one thing that like a human could do for you, and Nada is one that specializes in that. Jasper for generative content creation, again, something that could be used for work or could be used for your housewarming party invitation. One called Motion seems to be popular for calendar and task tracking. Zapier AI seems to be good for connecting different personal assistants, and I think that has some good value to it, because if we have an explosion of personal assistants, you're going to want something that connects them and makes them operate and work with each other. That's sort of the burden of having many different apps that all do different things. It's hard to adopt those things if you're individually trying to adopt them. And it speaks to the value of those apps and personal assistants that can do it all, like ChatGPT. Be Done was an interesting one that seems to be a pretty complex to-do list, but it gamifies things, which can be fun if you respond to that, and sort of offering you challenges and like rewards. One that probably a lot of people have heard of is Notion. Not really a personal assistant, but it has a lot of AI and like smart capabilities that make it ideal for managing your personal life. Not so different from even like Google Docs or Quip or whatever else is out there in terms of Dropbox for like, yeah, documents. I saw two that were interesting. Leon.ai is open source, which I also think has a lot of value, because a lot of the other ones I mentioned are part of corporate networks, or are what is the word I'm looking for? Meaning that proprietary, meaning that they have an outsized level of control over your data and the product that you use, meaning it could change tomorrow, or your data could be sold, or they could remove or add features that aren't in your best interest. One that is open source means you can actually house all the code on your computer or on your server, and it belongs to you, and potentially even has options for customizing it and making it a little bit more personal to you. I also saw one called personal.ai that probably is capitalizing on new LLM features and fine tuning and like a RAG model, but it promises to be the AI that knows you a little better. So you're probably putting data on top of it about you and your specific needs and what your life is like, and then it will cater to you specifically. So it's not like a generalized personal assistant that everyone can use and it's going to work the same for everyone. That, I imagine, is a very small list. There's just so many out there and they all do different things, and there's so much crossover.
Random question, Joe.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I feel like I'm getting hit with ads, or I saw something that's like a pin that you wear that's like an AI assistant.
Yes. I want to talk about
What's
that,
up with
actually.
that?
I'm glad you brought it up. Yes. So probably using the new technology, there's a lot of companies that now want to explore AI that is both without an interface and also one that's going to be very reliant on integrations with hardware. So, Andy, you might be referring to the Rabbit or Rabbit, which is a device that you buy and it has the AI on it. And it's pretty much speaking with a voice assistant like ChatGPT with this device, no interface, no Google searching, no apps. It's all kind of there. It's prepackaged. The AI pin is pretty much the same product, but it lives on your lapel. It has like a projector, so you can project things on your hand for a little interface that you might need.
Whoa.
Even like giving
That's cool.
directions. Yeah. That's very interesting. And then even I think like all these models like ChatGPT have very simple, straightforward interfaces just for conversing, but they're going to do all these things that you might otherwise download an app for. And then I also, just speaking about hardware a little bit, I think that personal assistants that belong to the big companies like Google Assistant, Siri, Alexa, Google Gemini, Cortana, Bixby, they have a leg up in this competition because they are already either connected to the hardware that we already use, and there's advantages to that, meaning they can embed it in the apps that you have. They also, a lot of these companies already have interfaces that we interact with, like Google Calendar or Apple Calendar or Apple Music. Or
if you have a Samsung fridge, it might have Bixby on it. Like your fridge might already be hooked up to an AI.
And it means that they're going to be able to better connect and have agents for these things you already use. So it's going to be very easy and nice and streamlined for you to ask Google Assistant to schedule something. And rather than go and talk to a third-party calendar, they can say, oh, you're using Google Calendar, so we're going to make this experience of scheduling an event really easy for you. So I believe that's a leg up for them. These other ones, like this AI household assistant, they say they can schedule stuff, but it means you have to like connect your calendar, and it probably doesn't work with every calendar. And like, oh, Google might say this competitive niche personal assistant, we're not going to let you interact with Gmail or Google Calendar. That's always a threat with like corporate networks, is they can sort of shut it down and not give smaller companies access to work with what they offer. That's all I got on the personal side.
Yeah. So talking about the professional side, there were kind of two different use cases that I really saw. One is externally. So this is where maybe customers are interacting with the business, and you might have assistants to help them through issues that they might be facing, help them navigate the tool, etc. And so these are things like, again, if you've gone to your online banking and there's like a little chat thing and you can like talk to the chat and you're like, I want to open a new account. Then it's like, yeah, let me help you with that. Most of the time, a lot of these like very rudimentary ones, it doesn't actually get the job done for you, but rather it helps route you to the best person to talk to that knows this. So they might have different departments, and it's just trying to get you like, should I send them to customer service or should I send them to sales? Right. And that's really where the extent of that assistant is. So many different examples of externally facing assistants where customers are going to be interacting with that to help improve their experience, et cetera. Oftentimes it's also to help reduce load on their customer success team, because they might have, hundreds of thousands of incoming requests, and 65% of those can be automated because they're just looking to help reset their password or something, right? So very basic use cases. The second piece is internally. So this is where a company might employ or introduce a technology to its employees to help them become more productive in their jobs. So this is where you might imagine an employee needs to look up some information in the proprietary database, right? And so there might be an assistant that allows them to do search. And actually, interestingly, search was actually a big thing that I saw across all of these enterprise assistants, where a lot of it is like unlock the power of the knowledge within your company. And it's basically just like a search tool on top of your proprietary data. And then there's like maybe like some generative AI to help it formulate responses in more of like a human-like manner.
That's rag. Putting your
Yeah.
data in and having a little LLM. That's what we're talking about.
And that's where, again, like Joe mentioned, right, you might take that software and actually deploy it within your own servers. That's generally called an on-premise deployment. And this is where you're deploying this AI into your system that is isolated from the external world, so you limit the risk of things like cyber attacks or getting access to this information. And all of this proprietary information doesn't have to leave your system for the assistant to now leverage and interact with that information. So some examples of this, again, like Joe said, there is just tons and tons of assistants, like literally an explosion. And every other link is like top 25 virtual assistants for 2024. Like, here are the latest virtual assistants that are coming out near you. So just a couple examples.
I just wanted to mention, like, something I noticed too is they all have just weird names followed by .ai. Just like
Yeah.
pick a random, like a weird name .ai, and that's a voice assistant, or that's a personal assistant company.
Yeah. And there was one that was like Lily.ai, and there's like Core AI, and then just like other ones. So it's like some of the big competitors: Zoom, Adobe, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, IBM, Google, Salesforce. All these companies have some form of virtual assistant that they built. And in some cases, it is tailored more towards consumers. So this is like Apple Siri. In other cases, it's tailored more towards enterprise. This is like Microsoft Copilot. And the other thing, kind of like Joe mentioned, is the leg up that these large companies have is they already have an ecosystem that their users are in. So if you think about, I'm an Apple fan. I wouldn't say I'm a fanboy, but like heavy Apple user. Every device I have is pretty much an Apple device. So I have an iPhone, I have a Mac, right? And so now I'm in this ecosystem, and as they make updates to Siri, I'm automatically benefiting or able to leverage all of these new changes within Siri. And then the other cool thing is, because I'm within this ecosystem, Siri is actually more powerful because it can interact with the different devices or different things that I interact with across that ecosystem. So, for example, I might be using Apple Music. Siri can now control my music. Or if I use Apple Cloud, it can help me download or backup files into the cloud, right? And so these are things that wouldn't be possible with, say, a third-party assistant that doesn't have access to the same sorts of tools that these integrated assistants might have. Similar to Microsoft Copilot, right? There's a whole Microsoft ecosystem, Microsoft 365. They have all these different products that are all linked and heavily enterprise focused. Again, now they've introduced Copilot, which allows you to write emails and then also schedule calendars and then also build PowerPoints, right? And so these are tools where the integration of the assistant in the context of this ecosystem just enhances the power that assistant have and the autonomy that you're able to give that assistant. Because like we're saying, it's there's no robot in the real world to help you with physical tasks. But once we have that capability, it can now do more things for you, because it has more quote unquote integrations with the things around it.
So as you two have been talking about this, I just realized like we're being really big fanboys, if you will, of this technology. And I've got a little piece of paper in front of here where I am writing the buggy. And if you guys want me to go off on my conspiracy theory rants, I got 5 points to make that I think people should be aware of.
I got points to make about
When
the
you're ready
bad that
for
we
it.
haven't brought up.
Now maybe it's time to get into the good, the bad, and the buggy of this new wave of virtual assistants.
Why don't I try and summarize some good real quick that we've talked about? More information to people, potentially, I believe, always a good thing. More knowledge to people. Saving people time, meaning that they can go do things that are more important to them. Is that it? I think
alleviating
bringing
mundane tasks.
Yeah, potentially helping smaller businesses succeed, because they can offload a lot of overhead that they've had to do in the past. That will be very interesting to watch.
Another good of where we are today compared to maybe the history of this is the access to this like extremely high powered technology. And again, it's like on every Apple device. You can get Amazon Alexa for like $29.99, and it can do a whole bunch of stuff. And so I think that ability for masses of people to now benefit from this technology is something that we haven't seen in the past. I think it's still yet to be seen, the extent of the impact that this can really have on us as individuals. But I think it's very clear that there is an impact, and it's going to just continue to increase over time.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'm going to apply my little tinfoil hat. Tinfoil hat, Andy, ready? And take out my little notes and go on a rant here. Cut in, because otherwise you're not getting a word in edgewise with me. I got 5 points. One of them has 6 subpoints to make on this little piece of paper in front of me. All right. First and foremost, like the way these LLMs got made that are now these incredible personal assistants of us is ethically ambiguous, I think, morally gray. A lot of the content they used, they got as much information anywhere and everywhere they could to teach these powerful AIs what to do. And there is a very serious argument to be made that much of that was theft, right? The New York Times is in a lawsuit with OpenAI right now about it. And artists are sad because their art was taken, scraped, and now you can not hire an artist and have Dolly make it for you instead, right? So that is, I think, a bummer about these AI assistants. Secondly, just bad. These things are not like computationally like la la la. Like every single time you send something to ChatGPT a message, I want to say they estimate the cost is like 12 to 22 cents per message. That is in electricity bill. Okay? There's a pretty significant carbon input of like impact of everybody using the most powerful, biggest model for everything all the time. I work on a technology called distillation, where we basically take models and make them smaller for exactly this reason, because you don't need to have the entire human corpus of knowledge to ask a question like, when was George Carver Washington born? Okay, don't spend 24 cents of electricity to answer that question, right? I think there's a huge environmental there. Next, misinformation. So these systems, this is buggy. You're going to gain a lot of confidence. You're probably really impressed every time you interact with ChatGPT or something like that. You're like, wow, it really knows a bunch of stuff. But they also get a lot of things wrong. And they get it wrong in insidious and subtle ways that if you're not trained to detect can cause all kinds of problems. Like I'm seriously worried about kids who get ChatGPT to write their essays, because if they read that essay back, They might not know that they just taught themselves imaginary history that never happened.
You can easily see an example of this by leading on the LLM. So if you ask it about a fake event, like how is New Year's 2025, it's just going to say like, oh yeah, New Year's was great. Like it will actually respond to your question as if that event actually happened. So it is very clear that this thing is just trying to provide a response. And if it needs to, it's going to make something up in order to respond to your question.
One time I was asking both ChatGPT and Bard, this is OpenAI and Google's product, to help me research competitors. And I wanted to know which conferences my competitors went to and who went and what they presented. And I thought, okay, it won't have all the up-to-date information, but it invented a fake CEO, fake conferences that didn't exist, talks that never happened, like useless. But the thing is, like, if you don't know to fact check it, it's very convincing when it's wrong. So that's a bummer. Next, I want to rant about the bigotry of these models and this whole system. What was the very first chatbot called? Eliza, a popular woman's name. Siri, Cortana, Alexa. What are the smart big boy doctor models called? Watson. Like, everybody's pointed this out. There's like this weird cultural thing of if they're doing care work, they're given female names, and it demonetizes the value of that labor, the type of labor, and it makes other kinds of labor seem like, I don't know, it's just nonsense. And again, these large language models, these powerful AIs, they're just trained on what data we have available for them. And that data has flaws in it. If the training data is a sexist, the model will be a sexist. If the training data is racist, the model will be a racist. It's monkey see, monkey do. So there's bigotry and access problems with this technology. Right now, anybody can download ChatGPT through any app store and use it for free. Make no mistake about it, we're in the movie pass era of this technology. OpenAI gets free money for electricity from Microsoft, but like at some point they're just going to turn it off and make everybody pay money for it. And that means people who got relied on it, who can't pay American Western price per question, are going to lose access to it.
Mm-hmm. And if I can cut in and just reference the past here, this is basically what has brought us the internet today, meaning back in the beginning of the internet, it was sort of the Wild West. There was all sorts of information you could find. Everyone sort of had an equal sitting. But over time, the big players consolidated their power and all the traffic. And that gave them the power to limit basically what they show you. And so if you take Google search results, which I think is like a good metaphor for OpenAI ChatGPT results in its output, over time, Google search results have gotten very first influenced by ad money, meaning pay to play. You get put to the top if you can pay for it. And also just algorithmically, what's the word I'm looking for, has like distilled results into just a few things that everyone's seeing, meaning like new information or
it's biased towards like the high volume common things. And that's so literally a side effect of their algorithm, which is they're surfacing results and prefacing results based on how often other people click on that or how often that is linked in other places. And so naturally the rich get richer, if you will, because now those things are surfaced more, and then because they're surfaced more, they're clicked more, and that causes them to get. It's just like a feedback.
Even culturally, think about the information that is lost if, like, I don't know, there's a small country with interesting customs or languages and it's never appearing in internet search results because I don't know, like Western culture is overpowering all the results, then like that information just disappears. And I think we will run into the same situation with AI where there is a choice to be made about what sort of information it chooses to surface, and it's just going to ignore the fringe information, for better or worse. Sometimes that's a good thing, right? We don't want like fringe ideas all the time in mainstream, but it also means that like good things get lost as well, or don't get paid for enough to make it into the top. And all these companies, Andy, you said this, and I said it earlier, but um, these personal assistants will be marketed to us as ways to help us with our lives, but it won't happen unless there's also a benefit to the company itself, meaning there's an avenue for them to make money. And so that is going to mean result manipulation or pay to play, where only the richest can access the information. It's not going to remain, um, you know, uh, truly democratized, because it's expensive and they have an electricity bill.
And this is going to bring me to my biggest rant yet, which is prepare yourselves, everybody, buckle in, because the economy is going to change. There's no way it's not going to. Let's think through this. All these assistants, what are they supposed to do? Make us more productive and give us more time back, right? You're sitting there thinking, wow, think about how much more time I could spend with my leisure activities if I didn't have to do X, Y, and Z. And your boss is sitting there thinking like, think about how much more work I can put on one person if they could just do X, Y, and Z faster. In economics, they measure productivity as the amount of value that one worker can produce for a company. And we are at peak productivity. We are the most productive humans that have ever humaned in all of human history. And that's because companies and the economy are very good at co-opting things that make things faster for themselves rather than returning time back to people. So that's what happened with pretty much every major technology, and it's why you see Kieran listing all these company enterprise AI things, right? And I think that's just going to influence things like layoffs, companies trying to just keep going up and to the right forever with money, to try and get this magical productivity spike. And people are working the longest hours humans have ever worked in history. And I don't see that going away, to be honest. Mm-hmm. So, but in the midst of all that, you might have massive job losses. People might realize they don't need humans. And right now, when you're born on Earth, we doom you to starve and die unless you grow up and use the labor of your mind or body to make somebody money. Right? That's what we've decided as a species is what we do. And like maybe that needs to change pretty soon, because like if human labor is valueless, if it's the thing stopping productivity and growth, why do we work at all? If we don't want to work and our bosses don't want to pay us to work, what's the point, right? And then I think Joe touched on this earlier, but like, who's going to get the benefit of all this? Is this going to be a big monopoly? Is it just these massive tech companies that have swallowed our whole world that are just going to keep, and then we're going to have AI president run by OpenAI? Or is this going to be disseminated and doing like kind of like blockchain-y distributed federated technology where we're all co-processing our LLMs on our, like there's all kinds of interesting stuff that could happen here, right? What I can guarantee you is blockchain. It will be, yeah, you nerd. I can guarantee you things will change. Like this is an order of magnitude transformation similar to when the internet was invented, similar to when electricity came out, maybe bigger than both of them. Think about how much human life changed 20 years before electricity was widespread and 20 years after. Same thing for the internet. 20 years before the internet, think 1970 versus the year 2010, for example. Very different. And that change is going to happen fast and it's going to be unpredictable. And that's why we really care about, at least I really care about giving people information so you know what's coming and can influence the direction you want. Would you like the assistant to help you at work so you can make your boss more money? Or do you want the assistant to help you at home so you don't have to work so much? You get to pick in some sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just want to add one more buggy here on the enterprise side. Is something that enterprises are going to need to pay a lot of attention to, is the access to that proprietary data and what the LLMs are really doing with that. Because you could get into a case where, you know, you have an employee that's leveraging the assistant that you have internally at the company, and they're like, generate me a report about X. And that report happens to have customer or client information in there. And now all of a sudden you're surfacing, you know, private information into potentially a public setting.
Or
And
even
so this is just
scarier,
one
there's
example.
a case in Berkeley right now where at a lab, a tech lab in Berkeley, California, a coworker got mad. A man got mad at his female coworker, so he poisoned her with cadmium over 13 months. The guy only got 2 weeks in jail. So thanks for
Jesus.
awful, awful stuff. But imagine you could, hey, give me a report about X, but instead of X being about clients, it could be about the coworker you want to stalk or poison. About how much like whose disability does everybody have? Is anybody pregnant in the company? Right? Like you might give some information to your HR person that you don't want the whole company to know that might accidentally get leaked to everybody via one of these systems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is just that example of like our information, our personal information, our private information is extremely sensitive in many cases. You know, think about the medical field and HIPAA compliance. Like there's just so many different cases in so many different industries where this private information can be used for malintent, if, you know, accessed by the wrong people. And now these assistants are adding one more layer of abstraction where now we're leaving a lot of that discretion up to the AI if we're not explicitly programming those limitations into the technology. And so right now, again, because we're so early, people are like, let's get this really cool technology out and it can do everything. But oftentimes we're not thinking about, hey, actually, maybe we don't want it to do everything and we do want to have limitations or boundaries for this technology. And I think that's something that's really going to come up in this, you know, if we're talking about 2024 as the year of, you know, production and putting these things out more broadly into the world. I think that's going to be a problem that we really need to think through and solve in a robust manner. Otherwise, dangerous things could happen. Yeah.
Yeah, talking through this, it seems like a lot of problems do stem from the fact that this technology is in the hands of like, companies that are driven by profit. And this isn't a blockchain podcast, but I've been reading a lot about blockchain for a little while, and I don't know. We don't have to get into it, but sometimes I think it could be like a pathway to have like co-ownership of these tools that we use. Or when I hear about open source possibilities where you basically, you know, own the software, like make it yours, and it's not in the hands of someone who can manipulate it or make profit off of it. That just seems like the way forward if we can manage it. But there's so much to solve
The
in
reason
those areas.
we keep coming back to this every single episode, and I can't imagine us stopping, is the nature of AI. Developing it, inventing it, building with it has up to now at least been the domain of large companies or hot startups that got a lot of money. And
And a lot of data.
yeah, and like because it's companies doing this. Companies are these like weird, I mean, thanks to Citizens United, they're people, right? We pretend that companies are people. If they were people, they're bad people who only care about themselves and nobody else. Their job is to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. If your company doesn't show growth one quarter, you're tanked, right? Like the line has to go up and to the right forever. That's the premise of our stock market. So given that, that is the system from which this technology stems, which is why we keep coming back to do not forget that some of the buggy and the bad is coming from the fact that we live in a capitalistic economic system.
Not the technology itself.
Yep.
It is a tool. Once again, we've arrived at capitalism.
I'm the doomsday person. One way to use an assistant that will save you, if you're anything like us, so much time. This is my gift from me to the millennial first and 0th generation children of America. Stop translating things for your parents. Stop helping them write emails. Teach your mother to use ChatGPT. It will save you, so much time. I'm living in the golden age of not having to rewrite things for my mother. It's incredible for me.
Yeah. Also, tell your mother about AI FYI so that she can learn about all the topics on AI and how it's impacting her life.
Yes.
Yep.
We've gone on a journey of virtual assistants, and I want to circle back to the question that we started with. What if Siri didn't suck? Or more broadly, how is the next wave of AI assistants going to improve our lives?
I think we can say we're going to find out pretty soon. I think Siri's probably about to get a lot better.
Oh my god, I'm gonna look up the companies that Joe mentioned, the little pin AI thing. Cause I'm like, if that works, I'll buy it immediately. Take my money.
There's a video of the founders of the pin demoing it. It's strange. It's every piece of it is very strange.
Maybe in conclusion, we are seeing a major shift in the technology behind virtual assistants and democratization of this very powerful technology, leveraging LLMs. And I think there's a lot of really exciting, good things that we talked through. It's going to help us make our lives easier, become more productive, save us time and money. There's some bad things about how maybe some of this data is being stolen and leveraged to train these assistants. And there are many buggy things about this software. Like it might accidentally expose some PAI that wasn't supposed to be shared with the public, but lo and behold, it had access to that. So I think where we are is, we're seeing this shift. We're in the middle of this shift. And I think where we're still seeing limitations are, around some of these bad and buggy things. But I think also what Joe mentioned with agents, I think that's going to be the next big step is how are these assistants able to leverage agents and start to do more things for us beyond maybe even the digital world and coming into the physical world of, hey, make me a sandwich, or go pick up my dry cleaning, right? And these assistants are going to require new technologies like robotics, etc., to be able to navigate the physical world, but today largely limited to the digital world, and how we're interacting online.
I want a robot housekeeper. I'd love a robot assistant, a mother's helper, and dog walker.
I know. I dreamed of having a smart house, but then there's also the end of smart house when it just goes into this Terminator mode and starts locking them in the house. I was like, oh.
Also, if you don't remember, the AI is Peg Bundy from Married with Children. Like the woman.
Incredible movie.
Oh,
if you haven't seen it, folks.
Yeah. I'm going to go watch
it. Disney's 90s thing. Go watch it. But yeah, in conclusion, these personal assistants, whether that's the right name for them, but these sort of AI agents that can take actions for you, that help you with things, they're here. They've been here for a while. They're better than ever, and they're going to get crazy good. Prepare yourself. It's going to change things.
I meant, do you want to close this out with where people can find us?
But also we'll take that closing out too.
Yeah. Then let me try again on closing us out. Folks, we are AIFYIpod.com. Hit us up there if you'd like to tip us with a little buy us a coffee thing, or if you want to shoot us an email, you want to find transcripts or stare at our faces on our About Us page. Wherever you're listening to this podcast, please hit subscribe, leave us a review, and rating and a review if you're an Apple Podcast, because that would really help our algorithm. The best thing you can do for this podcast is recommend us to one other person, please. We're on track to give you an episode every 2 weeks, and we've got a newsletter dropping soon. So stay in touch, and we'll see you next time.
And shoot us an email, because I would like to know What is a virtual assistant that you've interacted with that you're particularly excited about? And how do you use that AI assistant in your everyday life?
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.